Hey gang, Voltie here. Today we're going to be doing a statistical analysis on Canbrawl 4. Last weekend on the 5th we had a very large event in Canberra. I think it was 111 players, which is just a great turnout. There is going to be an article on the website as well, and that will be linked to this presentation. The article will have a breakdown of each of the graphs that are present here, but this video's purpose is to give a much simpler look at the event as well as the numbers, as well as to provide both a video and written description of what happened here. So let's get into it. To start things off, let's talk about the data points that I'm going to discuss in regards to the event. So we have match point average. This is just going to be how many match points each card earned across every player that played it. For this event, there were 7 rounds of Swiss, so there were 21 match points available, and 10.5, which is half of that, would be the expected average. For conversion, we have 2 main categories, which are top 8 and winning deck. This is going to show the proportion of that card's attendance that meets that requirement. So if 2 people play a card, one of them hits 7th, one of them hits 15th, the top 8 conversion will be 50%, and the winning deck conversion will be 100%, which will be proportions of the total copies in the room. Notably, conversion as a statistic does have its issues. If a card is played 50 times and it makes 8 copies in top 8, it will be a proportion out of those 50 copies, even though it couldn't have achieved a higher rate than that. So in that case, we've developed a formula called the conversion factor, and the actual breakdown of how the formula works is something I can discuss if anyone has a question, but basically it's a scale from 0 to a capped number depending on how many people played the event, and therefore the maximum number of copies a card can have, and the played number as well as the actual goal. So in the case of top 8 and in the case of winning decks, it'll also be a proportion of those statistics. There is a scale from 0, and I believe in this event it was about 13.65. The expected number for any one card to reach is 1.0. So if a card takes up half of the room and it takes half of top 8, it has achieved 1. Half of the expected number to reach the particular goal has reached it. The higher a number is above 1, the better it performed, either because there were less copies and more copies in top 8, or there was only 1 copy in the room and it top 8'd, it'll receive the maximum. The further away from 1, the better it does. The closer it is to 1, the more it performed as expected. First graph is the most played pointed cards. You can read it for yourself, but as you can see here, Force of Will, Fourth Earlingus, Broadside Bombardiers, Bowmasters, Reanimate, these were the top 5 cards that got played. And then in the played versus point buy, this is the amount of points spent over the course of all of the cards being played. So in the case of Lutri, each copy costs the player 3 points, and that way it has the highest point expenditure because it has 15 copies compared to Force of Will's 39, but overall 45 points were spent on Lutri. Here we have the pointed cards in top 8 and their count. So in top 8, out of a possible 8 copies, there were 4 copies of Fourth Earlingus, 4 copies of Seasoned Dungeoneer, 4 copies of White Plume Adventurer. So these 3 cards have the highest conversion factor for top 8, the highest conversion for top 8. And as you can see here, there are several other cards. Any cards that didn't appear in top 8 will not appear on this graph, obviously. Here we have the top 8 pointed cards. So if a card appeared in top 8, it will appear on this graph. The more copies in top 8 and the more copies in the tournament, the wider the range for conversion factor. So in the case of Mock Sapphire, I believe there were 2 people who played the card. One of them top 8'd, so it had a very, very good result. Orcish Bowmasters had a conversion factor of about 0.6, which means a lot fewer Orcish Bowmasters made it into top 8 than you would expect out of how many people played the card. Here we have the total and match point average graph. This is going to be the cards in the... Sorry. This is the match point average of all of the pointed cards, and it has a cutoff of 10.5, so any card that did worse than it should have is not going to be on this graph. As you can see, Library, Profane Tutor, Time Twister, they were very high averages, however they did have low appearance rates. So the numbers that I want to discuss on this, or the cards rather, are Comet Stellar Pup, White Plume Adventurer, and Nadu and Caves of Chaos. Mox Pearl as well. There were quite a lot of copies, as well as Time Walk. There were quite a high point average considering the copies in the room. Across all of our metrics, this means that White Plume Adventurer, Gush, Seasoned Dungeoneer, and Deathrite Shaman had the best performances out of the pointed cards. This is a very simple breakdown. There are lots of metrics. You can use each of the metrics to determine what you believe performed the best. However, across each of the metrics that I've drawn the data from, these cards did well across each of those different data points. So if you want a very simple breakdown of what did the best, these cards are what you're looking for. Next we have the most played mainboard cards. These next few points are going to be pretty quick and dirty. So we have Island, Bloodstained Mire, Mental Misstep, Scalding Tarn, Swamp, Polluted Delta. This is simply a graph of how many copies of a card were in the room, and that's why a lot of the basic lands perform quite highly, because they're one of the few, well, they're the only cards that you can play multiple copies of. Here are the most played sideboard cards. We've got some Rebs, we've got some Bebs, and your typically standard sideboard cards that you would expect. For the most part, very few sideboard cards appeared in the main deck, so there weren't too many cards that were sort of split up, but there were some notable exceptions. So for a quick summary, the most played mainboard cards were Misstep, Bolt, Brainstorm, Fable, Ponder, Fury, Swords, Thoughtseize, Gataxian Probe, and Preordain. You can glean from this what you wish. This is obviously excluding the lands that were in deck lists. However, you can have a look at the full data set, and you can find which lands were also very commonly played. The most played sideboard cards were Pyroblast, then Red Elemental Blast, Hydroblast, then Blue Elemental Blast, Brotherhood's End, Hearse, Submerge, Duress, Ashiok, and Energy Flux. This set of data is most commonly correlated with the number of Grixis players that were in the room, and Blue Moon players as well. Most of these cards weren't appearing in sideboards outside of those colors, or outside of those base colors anyway. Obviously the Rebs were appearing in the red-white decks and the Mardu decks, and Hearse would have been elsewhere. But in terms of the blue X decks, a lot of them were blue and red, which is what bumped these numbers. The last thing I want to talk about is Abhorrent Oculus. This card is from Duskmourn, the most recent set, and out of all of the non-pointed cards, this card did the best across all metrics. Now there are a number of factors influencing this. For example, the Grixis Bus Stop deck had Oculus in it, and those players are very good. 2 of them top-aided. But I do think it is worth noting that it did better on average than most other cards that people were playing that weren't pointed. So for a brand new card, it appears that people have identified this as a potent threat and possibly a replacement for Murktide Regent, so I would expect to see a lot more of this in future. That's it for the stats analysis of Canbrawl 4. There is going to be, as I said, an article released on the website. I'll link that down below. There's also going to be a link to this video in the article as well, so that people can make sure they experience and watch this how they like. This video was brought to you with the help and support of my lovely patrons and donors. They do a lot for me to make sure that I can keep making content. This content is very specifically designed as a committee member, and I wanted to present the statistics and the data as objectively as possible, but obviously their support works towards that goal as well. If you like the content, if you like my other videos, please do consider subscribing. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really does help me out a ton. I'm looking to grow the channel and reach as many people as possible, so fingers crossed we can reach some threshold soon. But otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll catch you next time.